So, what if I told you that scaling your e-commerce business could actually be the worst thing that you can do right now? You see, I've seen founders triple their revenue only to watch their entire profit pool completely disappear. Guys, today I'm going to be showing you the exact CAC, LTV, and profit numbers that determine whether your business will make you rich or go bankrupt. You see, every e-commerce business falls into one of three different categories. Two of them can succeed. One of them is almost destined to fail. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly which one of these different categories you fall into. And more importantly, you should have a pretty clear idea what you need to do about it. Guys, my name is Nate, and today we're going to be talking about unit economics for e-commerce businesses. Now, before we dive into this, I need to clarify that there's really two different ways to think about the unit economics for any e-commerce business. The first is on a per customer basis, and this is the way that most marketers tend to like to think about the world, since the job of the marketing department is to, acquire and then monetize customers, right? The other way that we sometimes talk about unit economics is on a per product basis, and this is the way that most supply chain or operations people are going to talk and think about the world, since their job is to source and produce products. Okay. Now, for some businesses, for example, the Casper, the mattress company, it's likely that each customer only buys one item, which would mean that the two different methods actually end up looking quite similar. But in other businesses, for example, fashion, beauty, or food and bev, the two different approaches are going to look quite different because most customers will buy more than one unit. Anyway, in this video, we're going to be focusing on the marketing-based approach to talking about and thinking about unit economics, which means that we're going to be talking about terms like customer acquisition cost, or CAC, lifetime value, or LTV, and lifetime gross profit, or LTGP. Now, I am planning a separate video where we go through a similar process, except we talk about this on a per product basis. If that video is already out, then you'll find a link to it up here. If there's no link, then make sure you give us a follow so that you get a notification when it does drop. Anyway, by the end of this video, you will have a clear understanding of marketing-based unit economics and why they are the foundation of a financially healthy business. Okay, so first things first, we need to talk about the terminology. It's important you understand this stuff because doing so is basically going to allow you to put yourself into one of the three different profitability categories that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so the first term that is included in this topic is customer acquisition cost, or CAC. Now, CAC is basically how much you need to spend in order to get a new customer. The formula is pretty straightforward. You would basically look at the total marketing spend divided by the number of new customers that you acquire during that same time period, and that would give you the CAC. So, for example, if you spend $5,000 on ads to acquire 100 customers, then your CAC is going to be $50 per customer. So, why does this matter? Well, if your CAC is too high, then achieving profitability becomes a lot harder because it means that you have to generate much more profit out of each customer in order to warrant that high customer acquisition cost. Conversely, if your CAC is too low, then that could be a symptom that you're actually not spending enough on marketing. And maybe you're being very, very selective in how you acquire customers. And if that's the case, then it could well be that you are inadvertently constraining your own growth by limiting the number of new customers that you have coming into your business. Now, for e-commerce sellers, a pretty common mistake is throwing money at ads without actually knowing or checking if it's a profitable thing to do. And that's why we need to compare CAC to a metric called lifetime gross profit, or LTGP. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Before we get there, however, we also need to talk about lifetime value, or LTV. So LTV is the total revenue that a customer generates over the course of their relationship with your brand or business. So the formula for this is basically average order value multiplied multiplied by the total number of orders that each customer places on average. So let's say that a customer spends an average $100 per order and they make a total of 2 purchases, each for $100, then obviously the lifetime value is going to be 100 times 2 or $200. Okay, now onto lifetime gross profit, which is a more accurate measure of how much a customer is actually worth to your business. The formula for lifetime gross profit is the total revenue minus the cost of goods sold minus the fulfillment costs and any other fees associated with delivering that order. The other way, which I personally find a little bit simpler to think about this, is that lifetime gross profit equals lifetime value multiplied by the gross profit margin. So as an example, if you had a customer that had an LTV of 100, that's the revenue number, remember, and your gross profit margins are 90%, then it would mean that you're generating $90 of profit per sale. So you can afford to pay a relatively high customer acquisition cost. But if your gross profit margin was only 20%, that means that you're only keeping $20 per customer, right? Which means that you need a much lower CAC in order to have a profitable business. Okay, so let's move on to the 3 different types of e-commerce businesses that I mentioned earlier. As you may recall, 2 of these are types that can potentially succeed and be profitable long term. The 3rd type, if you're in this category, honestly, it's going to be a struggle and you've got some significant work to do. So what we need to understand here is that not all e-commerce businesses make money the same way. Some profit immediately, some profit over time, and some never actually reach profitability at all, which is candidly where things can get quite dangerous. Now, all businesses, including yours, fall into one of these 3 categories that I'm about to describe. As I go through these, I encourage you to think through your own numbers and figure out which of these 3 categories your business falls into. Okay, so the first type of businesses, and the most desirable ones, are ones that are first order profitable. Okay, that's the name of this category. So these businesses make back or earn their customer acquisition cost on the very first sale, usually because they have pretty good margins. So in terms of an example of what this could actually look like, I encourage you to jump into this spreadsheet, which you can download later. But basically what we're looking at here is a business that has a first order value of $100. They have a gross profit margin of 50, and so they've generated a lifetime gross profit of $50 here. What we're talking about in this example is a business that is paying $30 to acquire each of these customers. Therefore, they have a net profit of 20, which is just 50 minus 30. Now, 20 is obviously a positive number, which is why we call this business first order profitable. Now, based on my experience as a CFO, I'd say that if your business is first order profitable, then the name of the game for you is probably going to be scaling as quickly as you possibly can. Obviously, with the caveat that you need to keep costs in check along the way, because every sale funds the next. So growth when you're this type of business is just a lot easier to achieve. So if you're lucky enough to be in this category, then your main focus should really be about optimizing for more efficient acquisition while doubling down on profitable ad channels that allow for continued scaling. Okay, so that's the first and most desirable category. The second category that we have is businesses that are lifetime profitable, but not on the first order. So these are businesses that actually lose money on the first purchase, but they do become profitable through repeat purchases at some stage later in the future. So going back to our spreadsheet example here, let me show you what that could look like. So if we had a business that only had a first order value of $40, we have the same margin, then we're actually only generating $20 of gross profit on that first order. So once we factor in our CAC here, we've actually lost $10 on that first order. However, this is actually still a worthwhile thing for us to do, because when you you look into the future, and these are, by the way, these are months here, so we're looking basically a year into the future. What we need to realize is that these customers are going to come back. And when they come back for repeat orders, we don't need to pay the CAC again. We only paid that once at the very beginning. And so what happens here is that at a certain point, after the first order, we do eventually get into profitable territory. Now, the challenge I've seen working with these type of businesses is commonly related to cash flow. In the short term, you potentially have a funding gap or a financing gap that needs to be addressed. Depending on the length of this financing gap and its magnitude, as well as the overall growth rate of your business, it is possible that these businesses will need some type of external capital in order to fund their growth. So if you have a business that falls into this category, the key is making sure that you can finance your customer acquisition cost up front and that your customers stay around long enough for you to actually earn your way into that profitable territory on a per unit or per customer basis. Strategically, one of your top priorities should be figuring out how to shorten that funding gap. You know, the amount of time that you have to wait in order for each customer to become profitable. And that's typically the domain of things like retention marketing, right? Okay, the third category of business, which is the least desirable, is businesses that are never profitable. Okay, so these businesses never really make back the customer acquisition cost, meaning that they spend more to acquire a customer than what they earn in profit over the lifetime of each customer relationship. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is an example of what this might look like. We've got the same $40 on the first order as we had in the previous example with a $20 profit on that first order. We've got the same $30 CAC and we lost $10 initially. The problem here is though that I reduced the retention rate. This was previously a 50% number, so I dropped that to 20%, which is basically meaning that these customers are just not coming back as frequently. And as you can see on this graph here, what that basically means is that we never actually generate enough lifetime gross profit in order to catch up to the customer acquisition cost that we paid in the first place. And that's why you see a cumulative profit curve that looks like this. So if your business falls into this category, you need to fix your acquisition math ASAP. You either need to increase your lifetime value by adding upsells, subscriptions, or increasing prices, or you need to improve your lifetime gross profit by improving your profit margins, or you need to lower your customer acquisition cost by improving the ad efficiency and customer targeting. If your business is in this situation, it is absolutely critical to make changes before you run out of cash entirely. Although it is theoretically possible to build an e-commerce business without paid traffic, life becomes a lot more complicated if you're in that category. Trust me, because I struggled with this reality in my own business for quite a while. And the implication of it is that your rate of growth is likely going to be a lot slower if you cannot rely on paid customer acquisition. So now that you understand the concepts of CAC, LTV, and lifetime gross profit, as well as the three different profitability categories, it's time to ask yourself, which category does your business fall into? Understanding this is the first step to optimizing your strategy. So whether that means scaling faster, managing your cash flow, or fixing your acquisition model. So if you've made it this far, you should now fully understand the fundamentals of unit economics and how they define your path to profitability. If you would like to grab a free download of the spreadsheet that I was using earlier so you can have a play around with it and put your own numbers in here, you're more than welcome to. You'll find a link to that in the description below this video. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.